The lawyer's voice was steady, but his words felt like a knife. "Emily Carter, you inherit the property located at 17th Street. My breath caught in my throat. 17th Street. Everyone in that oak-paneled office knew what that meant. It was the sagging, crumbling house with boarded windows and a roof that caved in during every storm the house neighbors whispered about as an eyesore. Before I could even process the humiliation, the lawyer's next words echoed to Michael Carter, the family estate. My brother leaned back in his chair, his suit perfectly pressed, his lips curling into the smirk I had seen all my life. He didn't even try to hide the glee as he turned his head slightly and whispered loud enough for the room to hear, "Figures. You always were the leftover child." My stomach churned. My parents, Robert and Linda, sat on the polished leather seats behind him, arms crossed, not even looking at me. They didn't flinch, didn't correct him, didn't defend me. Their silence was an answer sharper than any insult. It was confirmation this humiliation was intentional. I gripped the edges of my chair, my nails digging into the wood. The weight of the room pressed down the ticking clock on the wall, mocking me as if counting each second of my public disgrace. Michael tapped his pen against the table in rhythm, his smirk widening. My father finally spoke, his voice flat. "Let's move on. Move on." As if my dignity could be brushed aside as casually as changing the channel on a television. I wanted to scream to demand why my entire life I had been treated as invisible as disposable, but my voice froze in my throat, replaced by the pounding of my heart. Vanessa. My brother's wife slid her manicured hand onto his arm, her diamond ring catching the light. She glanced at me with eyes that gleamed triumph. Her whisper carried across the room. "She'll never stand in our way." That moment burned itself into me. The humiliation, the betrayal, the icy silence of my parents, the cruel smirk of my brother, the condescension of his wife. It was more than inheritance. It was a declaration that I had no place in this family. I walked out of that office numb, the words replaying over and over in my head, like a curse. You always were the leftover child. My name is Emily Carter. I am 29 years old, a third-grade teacher in a small town in Ohio. Most people would describe me as quiet, dependable, the type who shows up early to work, stays late to help struggling students, and never asks for much in return. For years, I thought those qualities would eventually earn me respect in my own family, but sitting in that lawyer's office proved I had been wrong all along. I was not the daughter my parents wanted. I was never the one they bragged about. That role always belonged to my older brother, Michael. Growing up, I learned quickly that Michael was the son around which the Carter household revolved. If he wanted something, it was granted without hesitation. A new car for his 16th birthday. Done. Money for his startup idea after college. No questions asked. Meanwhile, I worked nights at a diner to pay for my textbooks, often coming home to find my parents asleep on the couch after yet another evening spent celebrating Michael's victories. The contrast between us was impossible to ignore. Michael carried himself like he was destined for greatness, broad-shouldered, confident, always dressed in expensive clothes, always reminding everyone of his business achievements. I, on the other hand, was the afterthought. My clothes were hand-me-downs, my achievements overlooked. When I graduated with honors, my parents didn't even bother to attend the ceremony, choosing instead to fly out to one of Michael's networking events. That pattern defined my entire life, his spotlight, my shadow. At family dinners, Michael's stories filled the air while mine disappeared into silence. My mother often dismissed me with a wave of her hand whenever I tried to share something. My father would mutter, "Let Michael speak." Over time, I stopped trying. I became used to the idea that I was the invisible child, the one whose existence was tolerated but never celebrated. The only person who ever made me feel seen was my grandmother Rose. She lived in that same crumbling house on 17th Street, the house that now, ironically, has become my inheritance. To everyone else, it was worthless. To me, it was the one place I felt wanted. Grandma Rose would sit me down in her kitchen with a cup of tea and tell me Emily's strength isn't loud. Sometimes it's quiet, but don't ever let them erase you. Those words stayed with me even when she passed away 5 years ago. Losing her felt like losing the only anchor I had, And now, as I stood outside the lawyer's office clutching the deed to that falling-apart house, I realized the cruel twist of fate. My parents thought they had humiliated me, reduced me to nothing. But inside me, a small spark flickered the memory of Grandma Rose's voice. I was the invisible daughter, yes. But maybe invisibility was about to end. When I look back on my childhood, the moments that sting the most are not the obvious fights or punishments. It is the silence. The silence when I needed them most. The silence that told me over and over again, you are not a priority. You are not enough. I remember my 10th birthday like it was yesterday. I had begged for a small party. Nothing grand, just a cake, some balloons, maybe a few friends from school. The day came and I sat at the kitchen table waiting. The minutes stretched into hours. No cake, no balloons, no friends arriving because no one had ever been invited. My mother had forgotten. She came home late from shopping with Michael, her arms full of bags. "Oh, Emily," she said absent-mindedly, "we'll celebrate next week." But next week never came. Meanwhile, that same year, Michael's 16th birthday was a full-blown event with 50 guests catered food and a shiny red car parked in the driveway with a bow on top. I watched from my bedroom window as everyone cheered, clapped, and toasted him. My father's voice boomed with pride. "To my son, the future of this family." No one noticed me standing there holding a crayon drawing I had made as a gift. I tore it up quietly and dropped the pieces into the trash. The pattern only grew sharper as the years passed. When I got accepted into Ohio State University on a partial scholarship, I rushed to tell my parents. My mother was in the living room arranging flowers for a dinner party celebrating Michael's latest internship at a prestigious firm. She barely looked up from the vase. "That's nice, Emily," she muttered, "but don't distract your brother today." I swallowed my pride and smiled, but inside I felt myself shrinking. Michael's successes were headline news in our household. Mine were barely footnotes. The betrayal reached deeper when I was 17. One rainy night, I was riding my bike home from work at the diner. A car skidded near the intersection and I swerved, crashing hard against the curb. My leg throbbed, my palms bled, and my bike twisted under me. I called home, tears streaming down my face. "Mom, Dad, can you come get me?" My father's voice was muffled laughter in the background. "We can't right now, Emily. We're out with Michael. You'll manage." Then he hung up. I limped 3 miles home in the rain, every step carving the message deeper into me, "You are on your own." It was Grandma Rose who patched me up that night. She lived 2 blocks away, and when I showed up at her door, soaked and shivering, she pulled me inside without hesitation. She cleaned my wounds, wrapped my leg, and made me soup. "They should have been here for you," she whispered, her hands trembling with anger. "But you are mine, Emily, and you are worth everything." I leaned into her warmth, trying to believe her words, even as the truth of my parents' abandonment screamed louder in my mind. College was no different. I scraped by with part-time jobs, waiting tables, tutoring kids, working in the library. Michael, meanwhile, received regular checks from my parents to fund his ventures. When one of his businesses failed, my father bailed him out with money pulled from a second mortgage on the estate. When I asked timidly if they could help me with books, my mother frowned. "We can't afford luxuries, Emily. You need to learn responsibility." I wanted to shout that they had just written a 5-figure check to Michael, but I stayed quiet, swallowing the bitterness. Perhaps the most cutting betrayal came 5 years ago at the funeral of Grandma Rose. I stood by the casket clutching her favorite locket she had once promised would be mine. My mother took it from my hand and slipped it into her purse. "This belongs with the estate," she said coldly. I stared at her in disbelief, but she turned away, adjusting Michael's tie as if nothing had happened. Later, during the reading of Grandma's personal letters, my father quietly removed several and handed them to Michael. I caught a glimpse of one written in her familiar handwriting for Emily, but it disappeared before I could protest. That was the day I realized fully even my grandmother's love could be stolen from me if they had the power to erase it. After Grandma passed, my life became smaller. I stopped trying to win their approval. I focused on teaching on my students who looked at me with the kind of trust I had never received at home. Still, every holiday, every family gathering, every ignored birthday reminded me that I was an outsider in my own bloodline. When Michael introduced his fiancée Vanessa at Christmas, my parents welcomed her as if she were royalty. I sat at the corner of the table invisible. Vanessa laughed loudly at Michael's jokes, and my mother leaned over to whisper, "Isn't she perfect?" Finally, someone who matches our family's image. I bit into dry turkey, my throat tight. So when I walked into that lawyer's office years later and heard the words, "Emily gets the crumbling house, Michael gets the family estate," it was not just about property. It was the culmination of decades of abandonment, erasure, betrayal. The house on 17th Street was not an inheritance. It was a message, a reminder that to them I was never the chosen child, never the heir, never enough. And yet even in that painful realization, something stirred deep within me. Perhaps the very weight of their betrayal would become the force that pushed me to finally break free. Perhaps the crumbling walls of that house would echo with more than their contempt. Perhaps it would become the place where their lies unraveled. The conference room smelled of polished wood and expensive leather, but to me it reeked of betrayal. I sat stiffly in a high-backed chair, my hands folded tightly in my lap, the deed to a crumbling house already burning a hole in my imagination. The lawyer, Mr. Stern, cleared his throat and continued reading in his calm, professional tone, but his words cut me open with every sentence. To Michael Carter, he intoned, "We bequeath the family estate in its entirety, including the house, the surrounding land, and all associated trusts." Michael leaned back, his arm casually draped over the chair as though he had been crowned king. A murmur of approval rippled through the relatives in attendance, distant cousins nodding as if this outcome was obvious. My parents exchanged a small glance, smug, satisfied, as though they had just secured the family legacy in the right hands. I wanted to scream that it was wrong that Grandma Rose had wanted something else, that I had proof hidden somewhere in my memory, scraps of her letters stolen from me years ago. But my voice stuck. The humiliation was too thick in the air. Michael turned his head toward me, lips curled into that mocking smile I knew so well. "Don't look so shocked, Emily," he said, his voice dripping condescension. "You never had what it takes to carry this family forward. Be grateful you got anything at all." Vanessa laughed softly, her fingers tapping on her diamond-studded phone. "Maybe she can finally learn how to fix things for once." She murmured, her words sharp enough to draw blood. I glanced at my parents, desperate for even a flicker of defensive kindness. But my mother adjusted her pearl necklace, her expression unreadable. My father leaned forward and said in a flat tone, "Let's not waste time. This is settled." Settled. As if my worth, my entire life, could be closed like a file folder. The lawyer shuffled papers, oblivious to the storm inside me. I sat frozen, my cheeks burning, the room spinning with whispers and judgment. Michael basked in the glow of victory. Vanessa leaned into his shoulder, and my parents radiated approval from their seats behind him. At that moment, the truth crystallized inside me. This was not just about inheritance. It was about erasure. They wanted me gone, silenced, permanently, written out of the Carter legacy. The crumbling house was not a gift. It was a dismissal. When the meeting ended, I stood slowly, my legs trembling. Michael smirked again, leaning close enough for only me to hear. "Sign it over to me, Emily. You'll save yourself embarrassment later. You know you can't handle it." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My nails dug crescents into my palms as I walked out of that suffocating room into the cool evening air. The sun had set the streetlights flickering on, and for the first time I understood something chilling. If I stayed quiet, if I accepted this humiliation, they would succeed in erasing me completely. The will was not the end of the story. It was the spark. And though I didn't yet know it, the fire it lit would burn far hotter than my family ever imagined. The first time I walked up to the house on 17th Street, the air was heavy with mildew and dust, as if the building itself exhaled decades of neglect. Paint peeled from the siding like dead-skin shingles dangled precariously from the roof, and weeds choked the pathway to the door. My heart sank. I knew the house was in bad shape, but seeing it up close felt like a slap. This was what my parents thought of me, worthless, broken, barely standing. Neighbors peeked through curtains as I dragged a box of cleaning supplies up the steps. I caught a glimpse of Mrs. Adler from across the street, shaking her head, whispering something to her husband. The humiliation crawled under my skin. To them, I wasn't Emily the teacher, the woman who helped their kids with homework after school. I was Emily the daughter left with the ruin while her brother inherited glory. Inside, the air was suffocating. The floorboards groaned under my weight. Dust coated every surface and a family of mice scattered when I opened the pantry. I stood in the middle of the living room staring at the sagging ceiling and felt tears burn my eyes. Was this all I deserved? My phone buzzed. A text from Michael. At the house yet. Don't waste your time, it's beyond repair. Just sign it over to me, Emily. I'll give you a fair price. Fair price. I could almost hear his smug voice behind the words. I clenched the phone until my knuckles whitened and shoved it back into my pocket. 2 days later, he showed up in person. His black SUV gleamed in the driveway, a sharp contrast to the dilapidated house. He stepped out in a tailored suit, Vanessa beside him in heels too tall for the cracked sidewalk. Michael looked around theatrically, his nose wrinkling. Wow, even worse than I remembered. He gave a mock sympathetic shake of his head. You really think you can handle this, Emily? It's a money pit. You'll drown before you even fix the roof. Vanessa laughed, her voice sharp. Maybe she can turn it into a shelter for stray cats. That's about her level. My cheeks burned. I crossed my arms, standing firm even though my insides trembled. I'm not selling. Michael's smile hardened. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Don't be stupid. Dad already said this was a formality. Everyone knows I'm the heir. The sooner you accept that, the easier it'll be for you. I wanted to shout back to demand why I had been erased, but the words caught in my throat. Vanessa smirked, sliding her sunglasses down. She won't last a month, she said to Michael loud enough for me to hear. And then she'll come crawling back. They left in a cloud of dust from his SUV, the sound of Vanessa's laughter lingering like a taunt. I stood on the porch, fists clenched, my heart pounding. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to escape the humiliation, to let go of the burden. But something inside whispered stubbornly, don't give them the satisfaction. Days turned into weeks. I tried to clean, to patch, to reclaim the house, but the work was endless. My parents called once, my mother's tone sharp. Emily, why are you dragging this out? Just sell to your brother. Stop being dramatic. I bit my tongue until it bled, refusing to give her the argument she wanted. The breaking point came at a family gathering. My father's birthday dinner held at the estate. The mansion sparkled with chandeliers, polished floors, and catered dishes. I arrived late, reluctant, and slipped into a seat near the end of the long table. Michael and Vanessa arrived last, Vanessa's heels clicking like gunshots. She leaned down to kiss my mother's cheek, then glanced at me with a smirk. Halfway through dinner, Michael raised his glass. To the future of the Carter legacy, he announced, eyes sweeping the room. And to keeping our estate strong. Guests clapped, my parents beamed. Then his gaze landed on me. Of course not everyone can carry that responsibility. Some inherit other things. His smirk widened as laughter rippled around the table. Vanessa leaned forward, her voice carrying across the clatter of silverware. Emily, have you managed to fix that roof yet, or are you still living with the raccoons? The table erupted with chuckles. My father didn't stop them. My mother didn't defend me. They sat complicit, letting the ridicule wash over me. My face burned hot, my throat closed, but I forced myself not to cry. I refused to give them that power. When the dinner ended, Michael intercepted me at the door. He pressed an envelope into my hand. Think it over, he said smoothly. $50,000. That's more than generous for a dump like that. Take it and you'll finally be free of all this. I stared at the envelope, the weight of humiliation pressing down. $50,000, enough to pay off my student loans, enough to buy peace of mind. The temptation was real, clawing at me. But then I saw his smug smile, Vanessa's triumphant glance, my parents' approving nods behind him. Accepting meant surrender. It meant confirming every cruel word they had ever said about me. I shoved the envelope back into his chest. No, I said, my voice shaking but firm. I'm not selling. For a moment, surprise flickered across his face. Then it hardened into anger. He leaned close, his voice a hiss. You'll regret this, Emily. You can't win. You never could. I walked away, my heart hammering, my legs trembling, but for the first time a spark of defiance glowed inside me. Humiliation and temptation had been their weapons for years. But I was beginning to realize I had a weapon of my own, the refusal to give in. The house on 17th Street groaned like an old man with every gust of wind. I spent my weekends and evenings trying to clean it, sweeping dust, patching holes with makeshift boards, and scrubbing away decades of grime. The more I worked, the more I realized how impossible the task seemed. Yet each nail I hammered, each bag of trash I dragged out felt like an act of resistance. This was mine, I told myself, even if they had meant it as a punishment. One rainy afternoon, I climbed into the attic to check for leaks. The air smelled of damp wood and mildew. The beams creaked under my weight. My flashlight beam landed on a trunk pushed into the corner covered in cobwebs. My heart skipped. I had seen that trunk before when Grandma Rose was alive. She kept it locked, telling me it was where the past rests. I knelt brushing away dust and tugged the trunk into the light. The lock was rusted brittle. With a sharp pull, it snapped open. Inside, wrapped in yellowed cloth, were stacks of letters, photographs, and a leather-bound journal. My hands shook as I lifted the journal, flipping through pages of my grandmother's looping handwriting. At first, it was ordinary recipes, gardening notes, reminders about neighbors. But then buried between two brittle pages, I found an envelope marked with my name. For Emily. My breath caught. I tore it open, my fingers trembling. My dearest Emily, it began. I know how often you have been overlooked, how often your voice has been silenced, but you must never doubt you are the true heir of my heart. This estate, this legacy was always meant for you. If this letter reaches you after I am gone, then something has gone wrong. Do not let them convince you otherwise. You have the strength they pretend not to see. Tears blurred the ink as I read. She had meant for me to inherit the estate. My grandmother had wanted me to carry forward her legacy, not Michael. My chest tightened with grief and fury. Digging deeper into the trunk, I found photocopies of legal documents, an earlier draft of the will. My name was there written clearly as the primary beneficiary of the estate. The later version, the one read by Mr. Stern, was different. Somewhere between drafts, my name had been replaced with Michael's. A chill raced down my spine. My parents. They had pressured her. Or worse, they had manipulated the documents after her health declined. I flipped through the pages of her journal desperately until one entry stopped me cold. Dated 3 months before she passed, it read, "Robert and Linda are pushing me. They say Emily cannot handle the estate. I tried to argue, but I grow so tired. I fear I will not win against them. I pray Emily finds her voice one day." The pages slipped from my hands. The betrayal was worse than I imagined. My own parents had coerced or tricked my grandmother into changing her will, and all along they had looked at me with disdain, as though the humiliation of the crumbling house was deserved. My phone buzzed, startling me. It was a number I didn't recognize. I answered cautiously. "Emily." The voice was male steady. "This is Daniel Hayes. I used to work with your grandmother's attorney. I think we need to talk." I hesitated, clutching the letter. "Why?" There was a pause, then his tone grew heavier. "Because what happened with the will? It doesn't add up, and I believe you were meant to inherit more than they gave you." We agreed to meet at a small cafe downtown. Daniel was in his mid-30s, clean-cut with sharp eyes that seemed to weigh every word. He spread papers across the table, public filings notes from his former boss. "Your grandmother's first will was very clear. The estate was yours. But weeks before her passing, there was an amendment. The handwriting on some sections doesn't match. And the witness signatures, let's just say they're suspicious." My stomach twisted. "You're saying they forged it?" "I'm saying," Daniel replied carefully, "that something isn't right. And if you want justice, you'll need evidence. Hard evidence." I slid the letter from my grandmother across the table. He read it, his jaw tightening. "This is powerful, but we'll need corroboration. A neighbor maybe who saw something. Financial records, emails, anything that shows coercion." I thought of Mrs. Thompson, the elderly neighbor who had often watched me play in Grandma's yard. She had once told me she saw Michael visiting the lawyer's office around the time the will was changed. My pulse quickened. She might know something. Daniel nodded. "Talk to her. And Emily, don't let them scare you into silence. They count on that." When I returned to the house that night, I sat in the living room surrounded by dust and shadows. The trunk lay open, its secrets spilling into the dim light. For the first time in my life, I felt the weight of something shifting. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't invisible. I had proof, fragile, dangerous proof that my family had stolen from me. As thunder rumbled outside, I pressed the letter against my chest, hearing my grandmother's voice in my memory. Don't ever let them erase you. They had tried. They had nearly succeeded. But now with these letters, the journal and the truth beginning to surface, a new fire stirred inside me. If they wanted me silent, they had made one grave mistake. They underestimated how far I was willing to go once I finally found my voice. The next Sunday, I stood on my parents' porch with the letter from Grandma Rose in my purse, and the journal pages tucked carefully into a folder. My hands shook as I knocked. For years, I had avoided this threshold, always the one to call first to ask permission to visit. This time, I came unannounced. My mother opened the door, surprise flashing in her eyes before settling into a frown. "Emily, what are you doing here? I need to talk," I said firmly. "All of us, now." Minutes later, I sat across from both of them in the pristine living room, the estate looming around us like a palace. My father crossed his arms, his jaw tight. "We're busy, Emily. Make it quick." I slid the folder onto the coffee table, my voice trembling but loud. Grandma never wanted this. She meant for me to have the estate. I have proof. For a moment, silence. Then my mother laughed coldly, shaking her head. "You're imagining things again. You always twist reality to make yourself the victim." My father's eyes narrowed. "Where did you get this?" "From her trunk." "She left it for me." "She trusted me." My voice cracked, but I pushed through. "She knew you pushed her. She wrote it down." My mother's smile faded. That trunk was supposed to be destroyed. The words slipped out like poison and my stomach dropped. They knew. They had planned to erase it all. Before I could respond, the door opened and Michael strode in, Vanessa on his arm. He glanced at the folder, then at me, and laughed. "So you found her old ramblings. Congratulations. They won't hold up in court." He leaned closer, his voice low but sharp. "You think you've found a weapon, Emily? You've just started a war you can't win." I stood gathering the papers, refusing to let them see my fear. "Then we'll see what the court thinks," I said, forcing strength into my words. I walked out before my shaking legs betrayed me. That night, I returned to the house on 17th Street to find the back door forced open. Furniture overturned, glass shattered. My heart pounded as I stepped inside. The trunk lay on the floor, its contents scattered, some pages torn, others missing. Panic gripped me. Had they destroyed everything? I dropped to my knees, searching frantically. The letter was still safe in my purse, but several journal pages were gone. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You should have sold. Next time it won't just be paper that's broken." I sank against the wall, tears stinging my eyes. For a moment, I wanted to give up. This was bigger than me. But then I remembered Daniel's steady gaze, his words, "Don't let them scare you into silence." The next day, I met Mrs. Thompson, the elderly neighbor who had always been kind. We sat on her porch, iced tea, sweating in our glasses. "I knew your grandmother wanted you to have everything," she said softly. "She told me herself. And I saw Michael at the lawyer's office the week before the will changed. He came out looking smug. I didn't think much of it then, but now—" She shook her head. "It makes sense." I recorded her statement on my phone, my hands trembling with both fear and hope. One more piece of the puzzle. But Michael was not finished. At school, whispers began to circulate. A parent pulled me aside after class concern etched on her face. "Emily, I heard some troubling things. That you've been unstable lately, that you're not fit to teach." My chest tightened. "Vanessa." It had her fingerprints all over it. I fought to hold back tears, forcing a smile. "That's not true," I said firmly. But inside, I burned. They were trying to take everything: my inheritance, my home, my dignity, even my career. That evening, I met Daniel at the cafe again. I handed him the recording of Mrs. Thompson's testimony, the letter, the surviving journal pages. He examined them carefully. "This is strong," he said. "But they'll fight dirty. They'll use intimidation, smear campaigns, anything to break you. Are you ready for that?" I thought of my parents' cold eyes, Michael's mocking smirk, Vanessa's cruel laughter. I thought of Grandma Rose, her voice urging me not to let them erase me. I straightened my shoulders. "Yes, I'm ready." Daniel leaned back, studying me. "Then we build the case. Step by step. You're not alone in this anymore, Emily. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of someone standing beside me, not against me. Still, the battle lines were clear. My family wasn't going to back down quietly. They had money, influence, arrogance, but I had something they didn't, the truth. And now I had allies. That night, as I lay in the small bedroom of the crumbling house, the wind rattling the windows, fear gnawed at me. What if they came back? What if they destroyed the rest of the evidence? What if the smear campaign cost me my job? But beneath the fear was a harder edge, sharper than I had ever felt. They had underestimated me all my life. They believed humiliation would break me, that temptation would silence me, that intimidation would erase me. But they were wrong. Each act of betrayal only carved deeper lines of resolve. I closed my eyes, clutching the letter against my chest. "I won't let you down, Grandma," I whispered into the darkness. Not this time. The courthouse smelled of coffee and fear. My hands trembled as I clutched the folder against my chest, filled with letters, journal pages, and Mrs. Thompson's recorded testimony. Daniel walked beside me, his calm presence the only anchor keeping me steady. Remember, he whispered, truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand. Inside the courtroom was packed. Relatives filled the benches, eager for drama. Michael sat at the plaintiff's table in a tailored navy suit, his smile sharp and predatory. Vanessa perched beside him, whispering into his ear, her nails glinting under the fluorescent lights. My parents sat behind them, arms crossed, radiating icy approval. They didn't even glance at me when I entered. The judge, stern and silver-haired, called the session to order. Michael's lawyer rose first, his voice slick with confidence. "Your Honor, the matter is simple. My client, Michael Carter, is the rightful heir to the Carter estate. His sister Emily received her inheritance as per the will. There is no case." Daniel stood next, his tone measured. "Your Honor, the issue is not inheritance. The issue is interference. Evidence suggests the will was manipulated against the wishes of the deceased Rose Carter." He placed the folder on the table with deliberate care. "We intend to prove that." Whispers rippled through the room. Michael smirked, leaning back in his chair. One by one, Daniel presented the evidence. First, the letter addressed to me in Grandma's handwriting. The courtroom hushed as he read aloud, "Emily, you are the true heir of my heart. This estate was always meant for you. If you read this after I am gone, then something has gone wrong." I heard gasps behind me. My mother stiffened her jaw tight. My father's hands curled into fists on his lap. Next came the journal entries, including the one dated 3 months before her passing. "Robert and Linda are pushing me. They say Emily cannot handle the estate. I grow so tired. I pray Emily finds her voice one day." The judge's brow furrowed. "This is serious." Then Daniel played the recording of Mrs. Thompson's statement. Her quavering voice filled the room. I saw Michael leaving the lawyer's office the week the will was changed. He looked smug. And Rose told me herself she wanted Emily to inherit. Michael shifted in his seat, his smirk faltering. Vanessa leaned forward, whispering urgently, but he waved her off. Daniel closed his folder, his voice firm. "Your Honor, this evidence shows a pattern of coercion and interference. The Carter estate was not distributed according to Rose Carter's true wishes." The judge turned to Michael's lawyer. "Your response?" The lawyer scoffed. "Old letters, hearsay from a neighbor. Vague journal entries, none of this proves anything. My client is the rightful heir. This is nothing more than a desperate attempt by a jealous sibling." Michael rose suddenly, his voice loud, impatient. "Of course she's jealous. She's always been the weak one, the invisible one. Grandma wanted someone strong, not someone like her. My parents and I had to make sure the estate didn't fall into her hands, or she would have ruined everything." The words hung in the air like a gunshot. For a moment, silence swallowed the room. Then whispers erupted sharp and stunned. The judge's gavel slammed down. "Order." His eyes locked onto Michael, his tone icy. "Mr. Carter, are you admitting that you and your parents interfered with Rose Carter's will?" Michael's face drained of color. I meant..." He stumbled, glancing desperately at Vanessa, then at his parents. My mother's face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. My father looked down, silent. Daniel's voice cut through the chaos. "Your Honor, I believe the admission speaks for itself." The judge's gaze was unyielding. "Indeed it does." He scribbled notes, then looked up. This court finds sufficient cause to investigate the validity of the amended will. Until such time, the Carter estate will be frozen. Further, given Mr. Carter's own statement, this court will request a full review for potential fraud and undue influence. The gavel cracked down again. Court adjourned. The room exploded into noise gasps, whispers, a few shocked laughs. Michael spun toward me, his face twisted with rage. "You think this changes anything? You'll regret this, Emily. You don't belong here." I met his glare, my voice steady for the first time. "I belong more than you ever did." Vanessa tugged at his arm, but he shook her off, storming out of the courtroom. My parents followed stiffly, their silence louder than words. Daniel turned to me, a small smile breaking through his calm demeanor. "You did it?" He buried himself with his own arrogance. I exhaled shakily, my knees weak. For the first time in my life, I hadn't been erased. I had stood in the light, and Michael's own words had burned him. The days following the hearing felt like walking through a storm that finally began to clear. News traveled fast in our town. People whispered in grocery store aisles, at the post office, even in the teacher's lounge where I worked. "Did you hear Michael Carter admitted it in court? They tried to cheat Emily." For once, the whispers were not about my invisibility. They were about their shame. Within a week, investigators arrived at the estate. Boxes of documents were hauled out. Financial records, emails, even drafts of the will, all placed under scrutiny. Daniel kept me updated, his voice steady on the phone. "It's exactly what we suspected. They pushed your grandmother into signing the amendment when her health was failing. And Michael? He's implicated himself. There will be consequences." Michael's bravado crumbled quickly. He stormed into my classroom one afternoon, his tie loosened, his face red. "You think you've won?" he hissed, careful not to let the students hear. "They'll never give it to you." "You'll see." His eyes darted, panicked. He wasn't the untouchable golden child anymore. He was a man cornered by his own arrogance. I met his gaze calmly. "It's not about winning, Michael. It's about truth, something you never cared about." Vanessa didn't stand by him. Rumors spread that she had quietly contacted a divorce lawyer once she realized the estate was frozen. She had married into wealth, not scandal, and scandal was all he had left to offer. My parents, once so proud to parade Michael as their legacy, now avoided public places. The church they attended every Sunday grew cold toward them. Neighbors who once nodded approvingly now turned away. The community had watched them smirk through my humiliation, and now they saw the mask stripped away. Their silence was no longer power. It was evidence of guilt. The court's decision came 2 months later. The amended will was declared invalid due to undue influence and potential fraud. The estate was to be redistributed according to the earlier version, the one naming me as rightful heir. Michael erupted in the courtroom, his shouts echoing until the bailiff escorted him out. My parents sat stone-faced, their empire of favoritism collapsing in public view. I walked out of that courthouse holding the official papers, the crisp weight of justice finally in my hands. For years, they had told me I was nothing, a leftover child, an afterthought. Now, the law itself said otherwise. The Carter estate, the legacy they tried to steal, was mine. That night, standing on the porch of the crumbling house, I looked up at the sagging roof, the peeling paint. It wasn't just ruin anymore. It was the place where truth had been hidden, then revealed. I whispered into the night, "We did it, Grandma." But victory was not just in the inheritance. It was in the consequences that followed. Michael faced investigation for fraud, his business partners pulling away, investors backing out. My parents lost their standing in the community they had clung to for decades. For the first time, they felt what I had lived all my life, isolation. In me, I had more than property. I had proof that silence could be broken, that justice, though delayed, was still possible. Spring arrived slowly that year, melting the gray snowbanks and coaxing green shoots through the soil. I spent my mornings at the house on 17th Street, the once crumbling ruin now echoing with the sound of hammers and saws. With the inheritance secured, I had chosen not to sell or tear it down. Instead, I poured my energy and a good share of the estate into rebuilding it as something new, the Rose Carter Community Learning Center. Neighbors who once pitied me now stopped by with casseroles, flowers, and offers to help. Children peeked curiously through the fence, watching as volunteers painted walls and replaced windows. For the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. I felt needed. Daniel was there often, sleeves rolled up, carrying lumber or reviewing plans. "She'd be proud of you," he said one afternoon as we stood in what would become the library. His words tightened my throat. "I hope so," I whispered. This was her dream, to give, to teach, to keep stories alive. Now it can be real. But healing wasn't only about building, it was also about boundaries. When my parents showed up unannounced one evening, I stepped outside to meet them on the porch. Their faces looked older, more tired, as though the scandal had aged them overnight. My mother tried first. "Emily, we just want to talk." I folded my arms, steady but calm. "Talk about what? How you erased me? How you chose Michael over me every time?" My father's voice cracked. "We thought we were protecting the family." I shook my head. "No, you were protecting your image, and you lost both." For the first time, I saw something like regret flicker in their eyes. But regret is not repair. I straightened my shoulders. "I won't let you hurt me again. You can live your lives. I'll live mine. That's the boundary." They left in silence, and I didn't watch them go. It was not forgiveness, but it was closure. Chosen family filled the gaps they had left. Mrs. Thompson brought baked bread every Sunday. My colleagues visited with stacks of books for the children's shelves. Daniel stayed by my side, not as a lawyer, but as a friend, perhaps something more in time, but for now, exactly what I needed. The grand opening of the center drew dozens. Children's laughter echoed in the halls, bright and unbroken. I stood at the front, cutting the ribbon, my voice clear as I dedicated it. "This is for Rose Carter, who believed in me when no one else did. May it be a place where no child feels invisible." Applause filled the air, warm and genuine. And for the first time in my life, I felt seen, not because of a title or inheritance, but because of what I chose to build. The house had once symbolized humiliation. Now it was my legacy. Healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant drawing the line, choosing who deserved a place in my life, and building something lasting from the rubble of betrayal. Family was not blood. Family was action, and I had finally chosen mine. Looking back now, it feels like 2 lifetimes, the years I spent chasing scraps of approval from people who never intended to see me, and the life I began once I stopped begging for their recognition. For decades, I believed blood was unbreakable, that family meant loyalty and love by default. But I learned in the harshest way possible that blood alone is not enough. Family is proven in actions, not in words or appearances. My parents showed me abandonment. They taught me what it feels like to be invisible, to be erased in plain sight. My brother showed me betrayal, how cruelty can wear the mask of entitlement. And yet, their actions taught me something else too, the value of boundaries. The moment I stopped chasing them, stopped trying to win their approval, was the moment I began to breathe freely. Grandma Rose gave me the courage to see it. In her letters and her whispered encouragements, in the way she chose me, even when no one else did. She planted a seed in me, a reminder that legacy is not about marble estates or gilded portraits. Legacy is about love carried forward, about choosing to lift others instead of crushing them. The Carter estate may now bear my name on legal documents, but that is not what matters most. What matters is the learning center, the children who step through its doors and find a place where their voices matter. What matters are the neighbors who gather in its halls, building a community out of what was once decay. That is legacy. That is growth. Michael faced investigations, his empire of arrogance crumbling. Vanessa left chasing a different fortune. My parents live in the same estate but stripped of the admiration they once worshipped. They have become shadows in a community that now sees them for who they are. That is their consequence, not mine to carry. And me, I am no longer the leftover child. I am Emily Carter, the woman who stood in court and refused to be erased. The woman who turned humiliation into strength betrayal, into purpose abandonment, into chosen family. To anyone listening who has felt invisible in their own bloodline, who has sat at tables where your voice was silenced, I want you to hear me clearly. You are not defined by their neglect. You are not erased by their betrayal. You are more than what they refused to see. Sometimes family is not given. Sometimes it is chosen. It is found in neighbors who stand by you, in friends who refuse to let you fall, in mentors who see your worth when others don't. Family is action, and you have the right to draw your boundaries, to decide who truly belongs in your circle. So I leave you with this. Don't measure your value by who left you behind. Measure it by what you build in their absence. I built a center, a community, a legacy of my own. What will you build? And if you've ever felt like the invisible one in your family, share your story. I want to hear it. You're not alone. Family is what we choose, and sometimes the greatest justice is creating one that finally chooses you back.